Deep in the heart of Georgia, hidden among dense forests and moss-draped oaks, stand military forts that have witnessed centuries of conflict, strategy, and tragedy. Stone walls rise like silent sentinels, their cannons long rusted, their barracks crumbling into shadowed silence. During the day, these forts seem empty, silent, almost dignified. But when night falls, when the wind whips through the ruins and the fog creeps along the battlements, the past awakens. The air grows heavy, thick with memories of soldiers long gone. Footsteps echo along corridors that no one has walked for decades. Doors creak open and slam shut by themselves. Shadows form shapes that vanish when approached. Visitors to these forts report feeling eyes upon them from every corner. Some claim to have heard whispers from the gun towers, voices calling names that have not been spoken in centuries. Others have seen figures pacing along the ramparts, silhouetted against the moon, dressed in uniforms of eras long past. And then there are those who swear they felt the cold touch of a hand, unseen but firm, guiding or warning them through dark hallways. These military forts hold more than history. They hold the echoes of battles, the weight of duty, and the restless souls who never left the stone walls behind. Tonight, my dear friend, we step into these shadowed fortresses together. We walk their crumbling hallways. We ascend their darkened watchtowers. We listen to the wind that carries the whispers of the past. And we uncover the most haunted military forts in Georgia, where the night is long and the spirits linger, waiting for someone to hear their stories. So tell me. If you were exploring a desolate fort at midnight, and you heard footsteps pacing above you, heavy and deliberate, would you climb the stairs to see who it is? Or would you retreat into the safety of the courtyard before the shadows reach you? Hello, my dear friend. I am so glad you are here tonight, safe and warm. Because the journey we are about to take is not for the faint of heart. Georgia's military forts are scattered across hills, rivers, and hidden valleys. Some were built centuries ago, carved from stone and timber. Some have seen battles that shaped the nation. Some were prisons, some were garrisons, some were strategic outposts along dangerous borders. The architecture alone is a testament to the people who built them. Thick stone walls, narrow staircases, fortified towers, and dark underground tunnels. Every brick, every beam, every iron hinge carries a story. And sometimes, those stories are not finished. Visitors report chilling encounters that defy explanation. They hear doors creak open when no one is near. They see shadows flitting along the ramparts. They hear whispers in the dungeons, sometimes calling their names. Some feel a cold breath on the back of their necks. Or a heavy hand rest upon their shoulders, though no one is there. Others report seeing full figures, soldiers dressed in historical uniforms, marching silently through the courtyards, their faces pale, their eyes empty, their mouths moving in silent commands. Before we step into these haunted forts, my friend, I want to ask you a question. And I hope you answer it in the comments. If you were standing in a dark fort, and you felt a hand touch your shoulder from behind, but when you turned around no one was there, would you stay to explore? Or would you run to the gate before whatever touched you follows? Take a deep breath. And let us walk together into the most haunted military forts in Georgia. Fort Pulaski rises from the marshlands along the Georgia coast, a sprawling brick fortress that once stood as a major defense against naval threats. Its thick walls, bastions, and gun emplacements speak to a time when strategic positioning and careful construction determined the fate of entire regions. Today, the fort is quiet, its cannons long silent, and the corridors empty. Yet visitors often report hearing footsteps echoing through hallways where no one walks. The sound is distinct and measured, the rhythm of disciplined movement that belongs to a time long past. Explorers who walk the fort's interior describe a sense of being observed. Empty barracks and officers' quarters carry an oppressive stillness. Yet there is the unmistakable impression of presence. The corridors are long and narrow, lined with brick and stone that amplifies even the softest footfall. Visitors often pause, expecting to see another person, only to find the hallways deserted. It is in these moments that the stories begin, ghostly soldiers marching along the walls, repeating drills that ended decades ago, their forms flickering in peripheral vision or vanishing entirely when observed directly. The fort's exterior offers equally haunting experiences. Walkways atop the walls stretch over the surrounding marshes, offering clear views of tidal waters that move silently beneath the rising sun. Even here, visitors describe hearing coordinated sounds of military routine, boots stamping on planks, commands called in disciplined cadence, the low rumble of movement that seems to come from invisible soldiers. Shadows appear to shift along the battlements, lengthening and shortening with no discernible light source, giving the impression that the fort is still alive with activity. Inside the guardhouses and gun emplacements, the air feels heavy with memory. The scent of old bricks and sea air mingles with an indefinable presence, subtle but persistent. Many who linger in these spaces report sudden chills or the sensation of being followed, as if unseen eyes trace every step. Doors creak slowly, seemingly under no influence of wind, and corridors echo faint commands that vanish as soon as attention is focused. The fort becomes a space where time folds, and the line between the living and the departed blurs. Visitors recount specific sightings of figures moving with precision. Soldiers in period uniforms, sometimes faint, sometimes appearing as if constructed from mist and light, march along the walls or through interior passages. They carry weapons, their steps measured, their drills exact. Some witnesses describe watching them perform maneuvers that correspond to historical accounts of the fort's military practices. Others report glimpsing officers inspecting formations, only for the figures to vanish when approached. These experiences are consistent across different parts of the fort and at various times of day, lending a sense of continuity to the reported phenomena. Even at night, the fort retains its presence. Moonlight illuminates the ramparts and casts shadows across the courtyards, enhancing the feeling that figures might be moving just beyond sight. The sound of command seems to drift across the marshes. Visitors describe a heightened awareness, a tension that blends anticipation with curiosity. Fort Frederica, a short distance away, offers a complementary experience. Built to protect the same coastal region, it shares a similar history of military purpose and strategic placement. Its walls and streets are quieter today, yet the echoes of past inhabitants remain vivid. Visitors report sensations similar to those at Fort Pulaski, footsteps in empty streets, the rustle of clothing as if soldiers are present, and the faint sounds of distant orders being given. Ghostly figures are said to patrol the walls, move along the streets, and occupy buildings that now lie abandoned. In both locations, the landscape itself contributes to the atmosphere. Fog rolling in from the coast enhances the visual distortion, allowing figures to appear and vanish unpredictably. Observers often describe a merging of sound and vision, where footsteps, shadows, and movement overlap in ways that suggest intelligence and awareness. The forts become living memorials, where memory is preserved in action and perception. The historical context of these forts adds weight to the experiences. Soldiers' drills and routines left an imprint on the spaces they occupied. Visitors experience the past in the fort's halls, courtyards, and ramparts. The forts do not merely recall the past, they replay it, subtly, for those willing to observe closely and move quietly through their halls, courtyards, and ramparts. Visitors to Fort Pulaski and Fort Frederica leave with lasting impressions, the sound of boots on stone. The sound of boots on stone, commands carried on the wind. And commands carried on the wind, and figures performing drills that no longer belong to the living. Shadows shift with intention. And the presence of history is tangible, almost sentient. The forts endure. As silent witnesses to their own legacy, preserving the memory of soldiers, routines, and the vigilance required to defend. A coastline. Shadows shift with intention, and the presence of history is tangible, almost sentient. The forts endure. As silent witnesses to their own legacy, preserving the memory of soldiers, routines, and the vigilance required to defend. A coastline. Shadows shift with intention, and the presence of history is tangible, almost sentient. The forts endure. As silent witnesses to their own legacy, preserving the memory of soldiers, routines, and the vigilance required to defend. A coastline. Visitors to Fort Pulaski and Fort Frederica leave with lasting impressions. With lasting impressions, the sound of boots on stone. The sound of boots on stone, commands carried on the wind, and figures performing drills. For those who step into their corridors and across their battlements, the experience is both educational and haunting, offering a window. A window into the lives, discipline, and lingering presence of those who once inhabited these coastal fortifications. Fort Pulaski and Fort Frederica stand today not only as historical sites, but as spaces where the past and present converge. The echoes of footfalls create a landscape where history continues to breathe, observe, and endure, inviting every visitor to witness the living memory of these remarkable fortifications. Fort Frederica rests along a quiet riverbank, its ruins weathered by centuries of wind, rain, and saltwater. Stone walls rise in jagged fragments, moss and lichen clinging to the rough surfaces. The foundations of old barracks and storehouses are visible beneath patches of grass and creeping vines. Narrow pathways wind between crumbling structures. By day, the fort appears peaceful, a historical site preserved by time and memory. The river glimmers in sunlight, reflecting the stones and the scattered remnants of a colonial past. As dawn approaches, the atmosphere changes. A soft mist rises from the river, curling through the ruins and filling spaces between the walls with a cool, lingering fog. Figures in colonial attire appear among the stone fragments, moving as if performing the routines of a bygone era. They are faint and translucent, yet their presence feels undeniably real. Observers often describe seeing soldiers standing at attention, walking along the pathways, or inspecting the ruins as though the fort were still active. This is the moment when visitors first sense the presence of the unknown. The air is heavy with an unseen presence. The mist begins to clear, revealing the true horror that lurks within. The horror that lurks within the fort is beyond human comprehension. The figures in colonial attire are but mere puppets, dancing to the tune of some eldritch force. The fort is a mere facade, a veil hiding the true horrors that lie within. The darkness closes in, and the figures vanish into the abyss. The last remnants of light fade, and the darkness claims the fort. The fort is consumed by the darkness, and the horror is complete. The darkness reigns supreme, and the horror is eternal. Whispers accompany these appearances. They drift through the ruins in the early morning light, carried by the wind and the curves of the stone walls. Some whispers are soft and indecipherable, mere echoes of conversation, while others carry fragments of old commands, urgent and precise. Occasionally, the murmurs swell into what sounds like battle cries, shouted across the empty courtyards and along the riverbank. These sounds are fleeting, appearing and vanishing with the movement of mist and shadow. Witnesses report a sensation of being observed, as though the soldiers are aware of the living visitors among them. The ruins themselves amplify the experience. Each step on the uneven stones produces echoes that mingle with the whispers and distant cries. Hollow spaces within the walls carry sound in strange ways, sometimes making a single voice seem multiplied, as if a small group were speaking simultaneously. Shadows stretch along the broken walls, cast by the low light of dawn, and occasionally appear to detach from their sources, forming faint shapes that drift across the ground. The combination of architecture, mist, and light creates an immersive environment where the past seems to coexist with the present. Visitors walking the riverbank notice small details that reinforce the sense of presence. Footfalls leave no trace beyond the natural marks of mud and sand, yet observers describe the feeling of an unseen companion pacing alongside them. The rustle of grass and the shifting of the mist are often interpreted as movement, reinforcing the perception that the fort is alive with activity from its historical occupants. Historical context deepens the impact of these experiences. Fort Frederica was established in the early 18th century as a defensive outpost, a strategic location along the river to protect the colony and monitor naval activity. Soldiers lived, trained, and worked within these walls, enduring long days and nights, facing conflicts that shaped the region. The fort changed hands and functions over time. Some witnesses describe the figures as carrying out specific actions, repetitive and precise. Soldiers march along the pathways, inspecting walls, or standing guard at familiar points. Officers appear to issue commands, their gestures visible but silent, while others follow in measured steps. These movements are calm and methodical, contrasting with the occasional bursts of shouting or cries that echo through the fog. The effect is a vivid impression of a historical routine continuing even centuries after the fort was abandoned. The interplay of light, shadow, and mist heightens the sense of presence. Dawn illuminates the tops of walls, casting long shadows across the courtyards. Mist swirls through gaps and archways, shaping the figures and distorting perspective. Lanterns or reflected light sometimes appear to hover in the ruins, revealing outlines of soldiers and equipment that vanish when approached. Witnesses report that the visual and auditory phenomena are synchronized, the whispers aligning with movements and the light highlighting figures in motion, creating an experience that feels choreographed by the memory of the place itself. Despite repeated observation, the phenomena remain elusive to documentation. Cameras often capture only faint outlines, and audio devices record fragmented whispers without clarity. The experience is immersive in person, yet difficult to translate fully to film or recording. Visitors leave with memories of movement, sound, and presence that cannot be reproduced. Impressions shaped by both perception and the environment itself. As the sun rises fully above the horizon, the mist recedes and the figures fade into the light. Whispers diminish, leaving only the natural sounds of birds, wind, and water. The fort returns to its daytime appearance, still and silent. Yet the impressions of the dawn linger with those who witnessed it. A reminder that history is not entirely gone, and that the lives once lived within the walls of Fort Frederica persist in subtle, haunting ways. Fort Frederica endures as a place where past and present converge. Its stone ruins, riverbank location, and lingering echoes of colonial life create a setting where memory, history, and perception intertwine. Visitors experience not only the physical remnants of the fort, but also a sense of the lives that shaped it, the discipline, duty, and moments of quiet vigilance that continue to resonate through time. It remains a living monument, a site where the past quietly walks among the stones, waiting to be seen and heard by those who enter at dawn. It remains a living monument, a site where the past quietly walks among the stones, waiting to be seen and heard by those who enter at dawn. Nestled along the banks of a quiet river, Fort McAllister stands as a silent testament to a turbulent past. Its earthwork walls rise from the marshy ground, thick and imposing, constructed to withstand bombardment and protect those within. The fort's design is both practical and formidable, with angled bastions, wide ditches, and elevated platforms offering strategic views across the surrounding wetlands. By day, visitors can walk the ramparts, explore the well-preserved structures, and imagine the fort as it once stood. Yet, at night, the place transforms. The Weight of history. Pressing against the senses and filling the air with echoes of battles long past. Pressing against the senses and filling the air with echoes of. People hear the clash of cannons and the echo of muskets. At first, these sounds are faint, carried on the wind as if drifting from the distant past. The boom of artillery reverberates across the walls, and the sharp crack of gunfire seems to emanate from empty positions along the ramparts. Visitors report that the sounds are not constant but arrive in waves, punctuated by periods of silence. The effect is disorienting, as though the fort is replaying moments of combat for anyone present, a spectral reenactment of the struggles that once took place on these grounds. Ghostly figures stand in the ditches, their forms faint yet unmistakable. Observers describe soldiers in period uniforms, faces obscured by shadow or mist, holding muskets or leaning on cannon carriages. They remain motionless, vigilant, as if guarding the perimeter against an unseen enemy. When approached, the figures seem to dissolve into the night, leaving only the impression of presence and the lingering sensation of being watched. The combination of sight and sound creates a compelling experience, where the imagination is drawn into the weight of history, yet the details feel rooted in something tangible. The earthwork walls themselves contribute to the fort's unique atmosphere. The thick embankments absorb and reflect sound in unusual ways, carrying distant noises to unexpected locations. Steps echo along the parapets, and the subtle groan of timber or shifting soil resonates more sharply than expected. Shadows stretch across the angled walls as moonlight strikes the surfaces, revealing shapes and forms that appear animate. The fort's layout, designed for defense and visibility, creates vantage points where the senses can easily be deceived, allowing faint sounds and movement to take on an almost lifelike quality. Visitors describe a progression in their experience. Initially, attention is drawn to the physical landscape, the walls, the ditches, and the marshes beyond. Then the distant sounds of combat emerge, punctuating the silence and drawing the mind into the past. Finally, figures appear, standing in the ditches or on the ramparts, immobile yet present, their eyes seemingly observing the living. Each element builds upon the other, creating a layered impression of a place where history is tangible, where memory and environment converge to produce a sense of immersion that is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Local legend enriches the atmosphere of Fort McAllister. Stories speak of soldiers who never left the fort, bound to its walls by loyalty or unfinished duty. Others claim that during certain nights, the sounds of battle and the appearance of figures are strongest. As if anniversaries of attacks or pivotal moments in history are replayed for those sensitive to the past. These tales are passed down among guides and residents, lending weight to the experiences reported by visitors. While anecdotal, they reflect the fort's enduring influence on the imagination, shaping how people perceive and interact with the space. These tales are passed down among guides and residents, lending weight to the experiences reported by visitors. While anecdotal, they reflect the fort's enduring influence on the imagination, shaping how people perceive and interact with the space. Others claim that during certain nights, the sounds of battle and the appearance of figures are strongest. As if anniversaries of attacks or pivotal moments in history are replayed for those sensitive to the past. These tales are passed down among guides and residents. Local legend enriches the atmosphere of Fort McAllister. Historical research supports some of the experiences. Fort McAllister played a key role during conflicts along the river. with recorded accounts of artillery duels and musket exchanges. The design of the earthworks amplified sound across the marshes. A feature intended to enhance defense but one that may also explain the echoing noises that visitors report. The fort's strategic location and preservation contribute to the vividness of these encounters, providing context for why imagination and environment can combine so powerfully. Yet the combination of spectral figures, distant sounds, and the overall sensation of presence extends beyond historical fact, creating an experience that transcends conventional understanding. Explorers and visitors note that perception is heightened at night. Low light, mist rising from the marsh, and the natural acoustics of the fort create conditions where faint details are amplified. Shadows shift across the walls, figures seem to emerge from the ditches, and the sound of distant battle feels immediate. The sound of distant battle feels immediate, and movement and stillness intertwine, producing a sense of unpredictability that keeps observers alert and engaged. The experience is immersive, blending the tangible features of the fort with the intangible echoes of its history. By dawn, the fort returns to a quieter state. Shadows shrink with the rising sun. The mist dissipates. The echoes of combat fade into memory. Visitors recall the figures in the ditches. The reverberation of artillery still resonates. The weight of history presses against the walls and ramparts. Fort McAllister endures not just as a historical site, but as a place where the past is palpable, where memory and imagination converge, and where the echo of loyalty, courage, and conflict continues to resonate through time. Fort McAllister stands as a testament to both history and memory. Its earthwork walls, marshy surroundings, and preserved structures create a space where the past feels alive. Visitors leave carrying the impression of spectral figures, the echo of distant cannon fire, and the profound awareness that this fort was once a place of vigilance and struggle. The legacy of the soldiers who walked its ramparts continues to shape the experience of those who step into its presence, ensuring that Fort McAllister remains a living monument to history and the lingering mysteries of the past. Ensuring that Fort McAllister remains a living monument to history and the lingering mysteries of the past. Fort King George stands at the edge of the Altamaha River, its weathered walls and wooden structures bearing witness to centuries of history. Its weathered walls and wooden structures bearing witness to centuries of history. As the oldest military post in Georgia, it carries the weight of battles, strategy, and lives dedicated to guarding the frontier. As the oldest military post in Georgia, it carries the weight of battles, strategy, and lives dedicated to guarding the frontier. The earth here seems to hum with memory, the air thick with the faint scent of aged timber and salt from the nearby river. The earth here seems to hum with memory, the air thick with the faint scent of aged timber and salt from the nearby river. Visitors approaching the fort often feel an immediate sense of presence, as though the land itself remembers every footstep, every command, and every hardship endured within its walls. Shadows of soldiers appear on the stairs. Those who wander the fort at dusk or after dark often report glimpses of figures moving across stairways and landings. The shadows are fleeting, captured only for a moment before vanishing, yet they are unmistakably human in shape. Some appear to be ascending, others descending, as if performing routines from a time long past. The figures are silent, moving with purpose, and leave a lingering impression that the fort is still active with the lives of those who once served here. Witnesses describe a chill when they see these shadows, a reminder of the fort's enduring connection to its history. Lantern lights move through empty barracks at night. In the quiet hours, visitors have observed lights gliding through the abandoned rooms of the barracks. The illumination is warm but ghostly, appearing and disappearing without explanation. The lights sometimes pause near bunks or along corridors, then continue as though following an invisible path. Those who try to investigate find the rooms empty, yet the lights reappear moments later in different locations. The movement of the lanterns is deliberate, almost ritualistic, and suggests that the fort retains echoes of the daily life once conducted within these walls. The fort's architecture amplifies its haunted atmosphere. Long wooden hallways, high ceilings, and narrow staircases create acoustics that carry footsteps and whispers across distances. Creaking floorboards respond to even light steps, producing sounds that seem to follow visitors, sometimes ahead of them, sometimes behind. The combination of physical structure and history makes each corridor and room feel alive, as if the fort itself is attentive to movement, aware of those who enter, and capable of interacting with the living. Visitors describe sensations beyond sight. A sudden breeze in a closed room, a whisper that cannot be traced, or the sensation of a presence brushing close are frequently reported. The history of the fort adds weight to its reputation. These experiences, though gentle, are persistent, reinforcing the idea that Fort King George holds memory within its very timbers. Some describe feeling watched while walking the parade grounds, while others sense a presence lingering near the river-facing walls. These experiences, though gentle, are persistent, reinforcing the idea that Fort King George holds memory within its very timbers. Built in the early 18th century to defend the frontier, soldiers endure harsh conditions, disease, and conflict. Many who served here did not survive their tours, leaving a legacy that some believe lingers within the structures. The shadows and lanterns are interpreted by visitors as remnants of daily routines, patrols, and personal moments that have become part of the fort's fabric. Each corner of the fort carries stories, and the echoes of the past make themselves known to those willing to perceive them. Explorers report patterns in the phenomena. Shadows often appear in the same locations, particularly on staircases and near doorways. Lantern lights frequently follow similar paths through the barracks, pausing at points that correspond with historical sleeping areas or gathering spaces. Some visitors notice that the fort's activity is more pronounced at certain times of night, when ambient noise is minimal and the air is still. The repetition of these occurrences lends a sense of deliberate presence, as though the spirits are performing rituals or preserving routines from long ago. The fort engages every sense for those who visit. Sight, sound, and touch are all heightened by the fort's history and architecture. The smell of aged wood and river air mingles with the sensation of cold drafts moving through empty rooms. Footsteps echo unexpectedly across hallways. Shadows appear and vanish in peripheral vision. Lantern lights glide silently, revealing glimpses of the barracks and leaving observers with the impression of movement and life where none exists. The experience is immersive, combining history, memory, and atmosphere in a single, continuous narrative. Fort King George remains a place where the past is palpable. The shadows of soldiers on the stairs, the drifting lanterns, and the subtle presence that follows visitors all contribute to an experience of living history. The fort stands as a testament to human perseverance, to the lives and routines of soldiers long gone, and to the mysteries that remain when the past refuses to fade completely. Those who explore Fort King George leave with lasting impressions. Even after departing the grounds, many carry the memory of shadows, moving lights, and sensations of unseen watchers. The fort's presence lingers, subtle yet persistent. And the stories embedded in its timbers continue to unfold for anyone willing to observe. Fort King George is not merely a historical site. It is a space where history, memory, and lingering presence converge, offering an experience that is haunting, informative, and unforgettable. Fort Barrington rests in ruins along the Altamaha River, its once formidable walls weathered and worn by time and tide. Moss and vines crawl over brick and stone, softening the edges of former fortifications while obscuring the shapes that remain. The river moves slowly beneath wooden platforms that once served as walkways and defensive points. The sound of water lapping against pilings mixes with the distant call of birds and the whisper of wind through the trees, creating a soundscape that is both peaceful and slightly disorienting. Visitors often remark on the feeling of presence that permeates the site. Footsteps are heard along the wooden platforms above the water, light and measured, as though someone is pacing or inspecting the river below. When explorers step onto the walkways, they find no one there, yet the echo of movement lingers, bouncing softly off the remaining walls and pilings. The effect is subtle, a reminder that the fort was once active, filled with the routines of sentries and soldiers who moved along these very paths. Some explorers report seeing figures leaning over the railings, peering silently into the river. They are fleeting glimpses, shadows with faintly human shapes, appearing for a moment before vanishing into the ruins or fog. The figures do not respond to attention, they remain still and observing, as if fixed in the purpose that once bound them. Their presence is unsettling yet compelling, drawing visitors' gaze to the water and the remnants of platforms that stretch above it. The wooden structures themselves creak and groan underfoot, even when empty. Boards warped by years of water and sun give way to subtle vibrations, creating the impression that the platforms themselves are alive with memory. Every step seems amplified in the silence of the ruins, and explorers often describe a heightened awareness of space, sound, and shadow. The river reflects light in shifting patterns that play across the underside of walkways and pilings, making the environment appear almost fluid, shifting between reality and imagination. At dusk, the ruins take on a particularly eerie atmosphere. Mist rises from the river, curling around the brick walls and wooden beams. Shadows lengthen and twist, merging with the shapes of the ruins to create the impression of movement where none exists. Figures that were glimpsed earlier may reappear in peripheral vision, lingering along the railings or vanishing when directly observed. The combination of fading light, fog, and reflective water transforms Fort Barrington into a landscape where the past feels present and the ordinary is rendered extraordinary. Visitors recount the sensation of being observed, not by a single figure, but by the collective presence of the fort's former occupants. Footsteps echoing across the platforms. The fleeting shadows along the railings. And the subtle vibrations in the wood combine to create a narrative that is invisible yet tangible. It is as if the routines of the fort, once performed by soldiers and guards, continue to play out in a spectral form, a silent rehearsal that leaves traces in sound and movement. Historical accounts provide context for the lingering presence. Fort Barrington was once a strategic post, guarding the Altamaha River and overseeing the surrounding lands. Soldiers patrolled its walls, inspected its defenses, and maintained vigilance over the waterways. Over time, the fort was abandoned, falling into decay as military strategy shifted and resources moved elsewhere. Yet the impressions of those who once walked the platforms, observed the river, and maintained the fortifications seem to persist, replaying themselves in subtle ways for modern visitors. One explorer described stepping onto a platform as evening descended. He heard the sound of footsteps along the walkway above him, distinct and deliberate. When he moved toward the source, the sound shifted, always staying just out of reach. A shadow appeared along the railing, hunched slightly as if peering into the river. He held his lantern steady, but the figure vanished before he could identify it. The steps continued, fading into the distance, leaving only the soft lapping of water and the faint creak of boards behind him. Another visitor recounted seeing multiple figures along the platforms, spaced evenly as though performing drills or patrols. The shapes were faint and indistinct, their forms blending with the shadows cast by the remaining walls and beams. The observers described a strange sense of rhythm, the steps and posture of the figures matching historical descriptions of fort routines. When the visitors tried to approach, the figures disappeared, leaving only the echo of movement and a sense of presence that lingered long after the encounter. Fort Barrington endures as a site where history and memory converge. The ruins, platforms, and river create an environment that preserves echoes of the past. allowing visitors to experience the fort not only as an artifact of architecture and defense, but as a living narrative of human presence. Footsteps continue to resonate, shadows continue to appear, and the water flows steadily beneath, reflecting the light and movement above. Explorers leave with lasting impressions, the sound of boots on weathered wood, figures leaning silently over railings, and the sensation of being watched by forces both historical and intangible. Fort Barrington remains a place where the past persists in sound, shadow, and form, inviting every visitor to witness the enduring presence of those who once walked its platforms and observed the Altamaha River. Fort Gaines sits perched atop a bluff overlooking a winding river, its stone walls rising from the earth like a sentinel frozen in time. From a distance, the fort appears solid and formidable, its cannon still pointed toward the water, and its windows dark and empty. The bluff itself drops sharply to the river below, creating a natural vantage point that has watched centuries of tides and vessels pass by. During the day, visitors can trace the outlines of old barracks, powder magazines, and observation towers, each structure echoing the history of strategic defense and quiet vigilance. As daylight fades, the atmosphere shifts. Shadows lengthen across the fort's stonework, and a chill often drifts down from the bluff, carrying the faint scent of saltwater and aged masonry. It is during these hours that the fort seems to come alive in subtle, mysterious ways. Visitors have reported hearing chains rattling from empty rooms, the sound echoing along corridors and through vaulted chambers. The metallic clinking is irregular, sometimes soft and distant, other times startlingly close, as though unseen hands drag equipment or secure doors that no longer exist. The echo of chains is accompanied by another unsettling phenomenon. Shadows appear at the windows, tall and indistinct, framed by the faint glow of moonlight or the lingering twilight. Observers describe the figures as silent watchers, standing motionless as they gaze over the river. Sometimes the shadows seem to move slightly, shifting from one window to another, maintaining their observation without any discernible reason. The effect is heightened by the empty rooms behind them, the stillness of the stone, and the sound of the wind sweeping along the bluff. Inside the fort, the experience is equally haunting. Visitors often describe the sensation of being followed, hearing subtle clinks of chains and shifting shadows without ever seeing their source. Every sound seems amplified, every draft and gust of wind contributing to the sense of movement among the silent rooms. The fort's history provides a framework for these experiences. Built as a coastal defense installation, Fort Gaines has stood through conflicts, sieges, and decades of abandonment. Soldiers once patrolled these walls day and night, securing the river, maintaining the armaments, and enduring long hours in austere conditions. Accounts from the past describe strict routines, the regular clanking of chains as gates were opened and closed, and the meticulous preparation of munitions. Some of the lingering phenomena are thought to be echoes of these past practices, the sounds and shadows replaying themselves in the empty structure. Visitors often note the interplay of river, bluff, and architecture in creating an immersive experience. The river below reflects the moonlight and the faint silhouettes of trees and ships, extending the fort's presence beyond the bluff. Sounds carried by the river can seem amplified, mingling with echoes from the interior. Chains rattling within rooms merge with distant creaks of the structure, creating an auditory illusion of movement in every direction. Shadows at the windows seem to synchronize with these sounds, appearing when the clinks rise and fading when the fort falls silent. The observation towers and battlements are focal points for many reports. From these elevated positions, visitors glimpse the river stretching endlessly, while the shadows at nearby windows remain fixed in place, as though the fort is simultaneously aware of and ignoring the living presence above. Lanterns or faint light occasionally appear in upper rooms, swinging gently, illuminating stone and wood in flickering patterns. Yet when approached, the light disappears, leaving only the cold, silent structure. Nighttime exploration amplifies the sense of tension and awareness. Each step along worn floors or stone walkways produces sound that resonates throughout the fort. The rattling of chains may respond, stopping when the observer halts, resuming when they move again. Shadows shift subtly, appearing at different windows or doorways. The combination of visual and auditory stimuli creates an environment that feels alive, yet empty. A space where the past and present coexist in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. Despite repeated attempts to document these experiences, the phenomena remain elusive. Cameras capture empty corridors or faint flickers of light. Audio equipment records echoes but rarely the distinct clanking of chains or shifting whispers. The full effect is perceptual, relying on the presence and attention of visitors to engage with the fort's atmosphere. Witnesses consistently describe the same sense of being observed and followed. The same silent watchers appearing at windows, reinforcing the impression that the fort retains the memory of its history. By dawn, Fort Gaines returns to stillness. Shadows retreat, chains fall silent, and the bluff glows in early sunlight. The river reflects the fort in calm clarity, and the rooms appear empty, ordinary. Yet for those who spent the night within its walls, the experience lingers. The sounds, the shadows, and the impression of silent observation remain vivid, a reminder that Fort Gaines is more than stone and history. It is a place where echoes of the past persist, where the weight of vigilance and watchfulness remains etched into walls, windows, and the bluff overlooking the river. Fort Gaines endures as a monument to strategy, history, and quiet mystery. Its stone walls, riverfront location, and lingering phenomena provide an immersive experience, allowing visitors to sense the presence of those who once lived, worked, and watched over the river. The fort offers not only a glimpse into military history, but also a space where the echoes of the past meet the living, creating a haunting yet profoundly engaging environment along the bluff. Fort Scott. In the heart of the plains, where the horizon stretches wide and the wind carries the scent of grass and earth, stands Fort Scott. Once a frontier fort, it served as a bastion of protection and order in a time of expansion and uncertainty. The barracks, guard posts, and parade grounds remain intact, offering a glimpse into the past. Yet as the sun sets, the fort transforms into a place where history seems to breathe. And the echoes of those who once walked the grounds linger in subtle, unsettling ways. Figures wearing old uniforms appear pacing outside. Observers describe soldiers in period attire, their movements deliberate and unhurried. They patrol the perimeter as if guarding the fort against invisible threats, following routes that correspond to the original defensive layout. When approached, they often vanish, leaving only an impression of vigilance and a lingering sense of being watched. The repetition of these sightings has been reported consistently over years, creating a narrative that intertwines memory, imagination, and history. Soft whispers echo in the empty bunk rooms. The sound is faint at first, barely perceptible above the creak of the wooden floors and the rustle of wind through the walls. As one moves through the halls, the whispers seem to shift, sometimes coming from one end of a room, other times seeming to drift along the corridors. They carry no identifiable words, yet their rhythm and tone suggest conversation or instruction. The effect is subtle but chilling, as though the soldiers themselves continue routines, speaking quietly in the spaces they once occupied. The whispers heighten awareness, drawing attention to corners, doorways, and the subtle textures of the fort's interior. The architecture of Fort Scott contributes to the atmosphere. The wooden walls, narrow hallways, and bunk rooms amplify sound, allowing the faintest noises to carry and echo unpredictably. Shadows stretch across floors and walls in the low evening light, creating forms that shift with movement. Even the wind, which passes through gaps in the structure, produces low moans that mingle with the whispers, reinforcing the impression of presence. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way, the environment responding to their presence with subtle cues that engage sight, sound, and intuition. The environment responding to their presence with subtle cues that engage sight, sound, and intuition. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. The atmosphere responds to their presence. The environment seems to respond to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. The environment responds to their presence with subtle cues. Engage sight, sound, and intuition. The impression of presence is reinforced. Visitors report that the fort feels alive in its own way. Explorers often describe a progression in their experiences. At first, attention is drawn to the fort's physical features, the ramparts, wooden planks, and rooms that have survived decades. Then the figures emerge, pacing outside, alert and silent. Shadows stretch across the parade grounds and along the perimeter, following the movements of the observer. Finally, the whispers arise, flowing through empty bunk rooms, drawing attention to details that would otherwise go unnoticed. Each element builds upon the last, producing a layered, immersive experience that is both captivating and quietly disquieting. Local legend enhances the mystique of Fort Scott. Stories recount soldiers who remained at the fort even after duty ended, bound by loyalty, unfinished orders, or tragic circumstances. Some tales speak of sentries who vanished during the night, their presence lingering to continue patrols for eternity. Others suggest that the whispers are remnants of orders, drills, or conversations from decades past, imprinted on the fort itself. These accounts are passed down through oral history and guidebooks, adding context to the experiences of visitors and framing the fort as a place where history is never truly silent. Historical records confirm the fort's importance in the frontier era. It served as a hub for military operations, supply lines, and local security. Witnessing moments of conflict and cooperation alike. The soldiers stationed there maintained strict routines. Patrolling grounds, training recruits, and performing daily duties. It is perhaps these patterns, etched into the environment and remembered by the collective imagination, that contribute to the perceptions of pacing figures and whispered voices. The fort's preservation allows visitors to experience the same spatial layout, enhancing the realism of these encounters. Environmental factors also contribute to the sensations reported. The construction materials, aged wood and iron fastenings, produce natural creaks and groans with changes in temperature and humidity. Shadows lengthen and shift as sunlight or moonlight filters through the fort, producing the illusion of movement. These elements, combined with the Minda's tendency to seek patterns, create a compelling environment in which the boundaries between past and present, perception and memory, can blur. By evening, the fort takes on a distinctive character. The figures outside continue their measured patrols. The whispers echo faintly through the bunk rooms. And shadows seem to move independently of any observer. The environment engages every sense, drawing visitors into a heightened awareness of both history and presence, producing a feeling of continuity between the lives that once occupied the fort and those who walk its grounds today. As dawn approaches, the fort quiets. Figures retreat, shadows recede, and the whispers fade into silence. The wooden walls and ramparts return to their ordinary stillness, yet the impressions of the night linger in the minds of those who witnessed them. Visitors recall the pacing sentries, the soft echoes of conversation, and the pervasive sense of being observed. Fort Scott endures as a place where history remains tangible, a space where the past interacts with the present, and where memory, environment, and imagination converge to create an immersive experience that resonates long after departure. And where memory, environment, and imagination converge to create an immersive experience that resonates long after departure. Fort Scott stands as a testament to its frontier past. Its earth and timber preserve the echoes of routine, vigilance, and duty. Visitors leave carrying the sensation of figures pacing the grounds, whispers drifting through empty rooms, and the enduring awareness that the fort is not merely a relic but a living connection to the history it witnessed. A place where the stories of the past remain alive for anyone willing to listen and observe. Fort Hawkins rises from the Georgia landscape as a testament to a time when trade and defense were inseparable. Built to serve as both a trading post and a military fortification, its earthen walls and wooden structures once hosted the bustle of commerce and the watchful eyes of soldiers. Today, the ruins stretch across open ground, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, yet they remain striking in their quiet presence. Visitors to the site often remark on the weight of history in the air, the sense that these grounds retain the echoes of lives long past. Voices of men bargaining in old languages drift through the ruins. Those who walk among the remnants of Fort Hawkins sometimes hear sounds that seem out of place. Conversations rise and fall in tongues that are unfamiliar, a mixture of trade languages and the cadence of the frontier. The voices carry across the ruins, faint at first, then more distinct as one moves through certain pathways. Observers report that the tones are neither threatening nor loud but carry a weight of purpose, as if the fort itself preserves the patterns of negotiation, the exchange of goods, and the rituals of daily life that occurred centuries ago. Some see ghostly traders walking the paths at night. Figures appear along worn trails and open courtyards, moving slowly and deliberately as if attending to unfinished business. Their forms are faint and translucent, often flickering in and out of view. Some carry bundles or goods, mimicking the motions of trade, while others walk empty-handed, observing the landscape around them. Witnesses describe the traders as maintaining a solemn dignity, moving with awareness of the living yet unaffected by their presence. Shadows of hats, cloaks, and tools shimmer in the moonlight, creating the impression of a moment frozen between past and present. The ruins themselves amplify the sensation of being observed. Walls and wooden remnants create acoustics that carry distant sounds and amplify subtle echoes. Footsteps along stone paths or wooden boards seem to resonate across the open space, mingling with the faint voices of invisible traders. The breeze through broken timbers produces soft groans and rustling, adding texture to the ambient sounds. Visitors report feeling the air thickening, a presence that presses lightly against the senses, heightening awareness and creating a sense of immersion in the environment. Fort Hawkins engages the imagination as much as the senses. The ruins are a labyrinth of pathways, open courtyards, and partial structures. Light and shadow play across crumbling walls and moss-covered timbers, creating the impression of movement even when nothing is present. Reflections in puddles or the glint of moonlight off exposed metal sometimes reveal fleeting images of figures in motion. The combination of sound, sight, and subtle environmental shifts makes the site feel alive, a space where the past continues to unfold for those who walk carefully through it. Observers describe a pattern in the phenomena. Voices often emerge near former market areas or along pathways where traders would have met to exchange goods. Figures are more frequently seen on nights when the moon is low, casting long shadows across the ruins. The ghostly traders appear to follow familiar routes, walking past familiar landmarks and pausing at points where transactions once occurred. Some visitors report multiple figures appearing simultaneously, interacting silently with one another as they carry out routines from a long-vanished era. The history of Fort Hawkins reinforces its mysterious presence. Constructed to facilitate trade and provide military oversight, the fort played a critical role in early Georgia history. Soldiers, merchants, and local residents interacted within its walls, often navigating tense negotiations and the uncertainties of frontier life. Many who walked these paths have long since passed, yet their routines, movements, and exchanges appear preserved in the fabric of the ruins. The voices and figures seen today are interpreted as echoes of that life, replayed by the fort as a testament to its enduring significance. Visitors often report subtle physical sensations alongside the visual and auditory experiences. A chill may brush across the neck or shoulders as one approaches an open courtyard. The air sometimes feels heavier near certain walls or pathways. Footsteps seem to synchronize with unseen companions, and occasional brushing sounds mimic the movement of passing figures. These sensations add to the immersive quality of the ruins, reinforcing the impression that the past is present, hovering just beyond the edge of perception. Even brief exploration leaves a lasting impression. The combination of voices, ghostly traders, and the environmental cues of wind, shadow, and sound creates an experience that is unforgettable. Each visitor leaves with a heightened awareness of history, presence, and the delicate boundary between the living and those who remain in memory. Each visitor leaves with a heightened awareness of history, presence, and the delicate boundary between the living and those who remain in memory. Fort Hawkins remains a place where history is alive. The voices of men bargaining, the figures of ghostly traders, and the subtle atmospheric effects converge to create a setting that is haunting, immersive, and cinematic. The ruins are more than stone and timber, they are a repository of human action, memory, and presence. Visitors who walk its pathways witness the past unfolding in delicate glimpses, where every step, sound, and shadow tells a story that has endured for generations. Those who experience Fort Hawkins leave with the echo of the fort carried within them. The sound of faint bargaining voices, the shimmer of ghostly traders, and the sense of life preserved in ruins continue long after departing. Fort Yargo stands quietly amid the rolling hills, a small frontier fort built from timber and stone. Its walls, weathered by decades of sun, rain, and wind, bear the marks of both construction and time. The fort's courtyards, once bustling with soldiers and settlers, are now silent, open spaces where grass grows between the cracks in stone and wooden planks. The towers rise above the walls, offering vantage points that once oversaw the surrounding landscape, now empty yet full of history. Visitors often remark on the atmosphere of stillness that pervades the fort. Yet within this calm, sounds emerge that are not entirely explained by the environment. In the courtyards, explorers report hearing the faint sounds of children crying, followed by the patter of running feet. The noises are fleeting, appearing for moments before fading into silence. There is no one visible, no movement of trees or animals to account for the sounds. Only the impression of life that once inhabited these spaces. The towers themselves seem to hold a presence. Figures in tattered uniforms have been reported, standing silently and observing the grounds below. They do not move, speak, or react to visitors, yet their gaze is felt, a subtle pressure of awareness that makes those who approach the fort feel watched. The figures appear intermittently, sometimes leaning over the railings, other times standing rigidly against the walls. When observed directly, they often vanish, leaving only shadows and the memory of their presence. Walking the courtyards, visitors describe an uncanny sense of movement. Steps seem to echo where no one walks, and the sound of distant laughter or sobbing drifts along the wind. Wooden doors creak as though opened by unseen hands, and planks groan underfoot even when empty. These phenomena combine to create an impression that the fort is alive with memory, replaying the routines and moments of those who once lived and trained within its walls. The small size of Fort Yargo amplifies the intimacy of these experiences. Unlike larger forts, where empty barracks can feel impersonal. Here every wall, tower, and corner seems connected. Sounds travel easily, shadows stretch long across the courtyards. And the presence of figures in the towers feels immediate. Visitors often report a heightened awareness of the environment, sensing that the fort's history is layered upon itself. Replaying quietly for those who pay attention. Historical context provides insight into these lingering impressions. Fort Yargo was built as a frontier defense, a small but vital post designed to protect settlers and maintain order in unsettled territory. Soldiers trained in the courtyards, children played in safe spaces within the walls, and families sometimes lived in temporary quarters inside the fort. Life was structured, rhythmic, and disciplined, yet punctuated with moments of ordinary human emotion. The echoes of those activities, preserved in the fort spaces, may explain why visitors sense movement, hear footsteps, and glimpse figures that seem drawn from the past. The fort's towers offer some of the most vivid experiences. Visitors climbing the steps often feel a sudden chill, a subtle drop in temperature that contrasts with the surrounding air. From the top, the landscape spreads in every direction, yet the focus is drawn back to the fort itself. Some report seeing figures in uniforms leaning over the railings, watching silently as though performing their duties. Their presence is still, yet deliberate, as if the fort itself has preserved the memory of vigilance and watchfulness for anyone who enters. One visitor recounted standing in the central courtyard at dusk, hearing the faint laughter of children followed by the echo of running steps. He turned to follow the sound, but the space remained empty. Looking up, he glimpsed a figure in a tower, motionless and observing. The figure did not speak, move, or react, yet the sensation of being watched was undeniable. When he turned to leave, both the sound and the figure vanished, leaving the courtyard in quiet stillness once more. Another explorer described walking along the wooden walkways, feeling the soft pressure of unseen eyes as he moved. He reported hearing sobbing from the corner of the courtyard, followed by hurried steps moving away. Glancing toward the towers, he saw shadows that seemed to shift with intent, aligning with the rhythm of the footsteps. Attempts to approach these figures proved futile, they would disappear into the shadows, leaving only the memory of their presence. Fort Yargo endures as a place where history and memory converge. The sounds of children, the figures in tattered uniforms, and the echoing footsteps create an immersive experience that transcends ordinary exploration. Visitors leave with a sense that the fort is alive not in a literal sense, but through the persistence of past activity, emotion, and vigilance. The walls, courtyards, and towers act as vessels for these impressions, preserving moments that continue to interact with those who enter the space. For those who explore Fort Yargo, the experience is both haunting and enlightening. The quiet courtyards carry the echoes of life. The towers hold silent watchers. And the entire fort seems to breathe with memory. It is a place where history lingers palpably, where the past is visible in shadow, heard in sound, and felt in presence. Every visitor departs carrying the imprint of these experiences. A reminder of the lives, vigilance, and echoes that continue to inhabit Fort Yargo. Fort Argyle rests along a bend of the river, an old fortification built to guard strategic waterways. Its earthworks rise from the field like low, rounded hills, weathered and softened by centuries of wind and rain. Grass covers much of the original structure, yet the contours of defensive trenches and mounds remain visible, tracing the lines where soldiers once stood watch. By day, the fort appears peaceful, the river glinting in sunlight, and the surrounding fields calm. Walking across the open field, visitors often notice shadows moving across the earthworks. At first, the movement is peripheral, glimpsed from the corner of the eye. Shapes shift along the contours of mounds and trenches, blending with natural variations in light and terrain. As twilight deepens, these shadows become more distinct, taking forms that resemble figures pacing the ramparts, observing the river below, or standing guard at the edges of the fort. They vanish when approached directly, leaving only the faint impression of motion and presence. Soft footsteps accompany the shadows, echoing across the field. They are light and uneven, sometimes keeping pace with the visitor, sometimes lagging behind, as if moving independently. The sounds are subtle yet distinct, rising and fading with the natural noises of the environment. Even in the absence of other people, the footsteps create a sensation of being followed, of shared space with unseen companions who move along paths carved by memory and history. The effect is immersive, heightening awareness of the fort and the land it occupies. The river itself contributes to the fort's atmosphere. Its slow current reflects the fading light, and the sound of water lapping against banks carries across the open field. Observers note that shadows and footsteps often seem synchronized with the rhythm of the river, moving in tandem with the flow or appearing when ripples reach certain points. The combination of water, earthworks, and fading light creates a layered sensory experience, blending natural phenomena with something that feels beyond explanation. Constructed during a period of colonial conflict, the fort was garrisoned to monitor and defend the river. Accounts from the period describe strict routines, footfalls along the earthworks, and constant observation of the river and surrounding terrain. The remnants of a once thriving garrison now stand as a haunting testament to the transience of human endeavor. Visitors report an unusual sensation of temporal layering. The field feels alive with echoes of the past, as though moments from centuries ago are replaying in parallel with the present. Shadows moving along the mounds, figures appearing and disappearing, and soft footsteps create a sense of interaction between history and observer. Even the wind seems to carry a memory, shifting in patterns that accentuate the shadows and sounds. This interaction creates a cinematic quality, where time feels fluid and the fort is not only a place of stone and earth but a space where memory and presence coexist. The open nature of the field amplifies these phenomena. Without walls to contain sound, footsteps echo farther than expected. And movements along the earthworks appear larger than life. Mist occasionally rises from the river in low patches, swirling through trenches and mounds, obscuring vision and lending depth to the shadows. In these moments, the field becomes immersive. And visitors often describe heightened awareness of the space. Sensing entities or forces moving around them that cannot be fully seen. The earthworks themselves hold visual and tactile resonance. Visitors feel the subtle incline of trenches beneath their feet. The uneven texture of mounds formed from centuries of construction and erosion. These features contribute to the perception of movement and presence. Observers often pause at prominent points, noting that the shadows seem drawn to these high vantage spots. Mirroring positions once used by soldiers to observe and defend. Despite repeated attempts to document the phenomena, the experiences of shadows and footsteps remain elusive. Cameras may capture indistinct shapes or shifts in light, and audio devices record faint echoes, yet the full presence is rarely captured. Those who witness it in person describe a vivid sense of interaction, a combination of sight, sound, and feeling that cannot be reproduced fully. The fort continues to evoke the sense that the past is present, revealing itself selectively to those who walk the field at dusk. By nightfall, the shadows recede and the footsteps fade, leaving the field in quiet solitude. The river reflects starlight, and the earthworks appear once more as gentle rises in the landscape. The river reflects starlight, and the earthworks appear once more as gentle rises in the landscape. Yet the memory of dusk lingers with visitors, the sensation of presence, the echo of footsteps, and the fleeting forms across the mounds imprinted in perception. Yet the memory of dusk lingers with visitors, the sensation of presence, the echo of footsteps, and the fleeting forms across the mounds imprinted in perception. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll endures not only as a historical site but as a place where the layers of time remain visible to those willing to walk its field and witness the lingering traces of vigilance, movement, and history across the river bluff. Fort Argyll remains a testament to strategic placement, human endurance, and historical memory. Its earthworks, riverbank location, and spectral phenomena provide a space where the past quietly asserts itself. Where shadows and sounds evoke the presence of soldiers long gone. Where shadows and sounds evoke the presence of soldiers long gone. Visitors leave with a sense of connection to the fort's history. Aware that the land itself retains impressions of duty and watchfulness. And that even centuries later, the river fort continues to observe those who traverse its fields at dusk. Perched atop a hill overlooking the surrounding valleys, Fort George Wright stands abandoned, a relic of a time when military strategy and vigilance shaped the landscape. Its stone and brick walls, once formidable, now bear the marks of weather and age. Windows are broken or missing, doors hang loosely on their hinges, and the echo of wind through the ruins carries a quiet, haunting resonance. By day, the fort is a study in history, a place where visitors can trace the paths of former soldiers and imagine the routines that once filled its corridors. At night, however, the hilltop fort transforms into a site where the past seems to linger, where echoes of former presence are almost tangible. Lantern lights flicker inside the ruins. Observers describe pale glows moving across long-abandoned rooms, casting wavering shadows on walls and floors. The lights seem to drift, not following natural air currents or human hands, appearing in spaces that are otherwise empty. Some appear on tables that have long since decayed, or in hallways where no one walks. The flickering creates patterns that suggest purpose, as though Sumania or Somthinga is navigating the fort along familiar routes. The effect is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but persistent, drawing attention and curiosity from all who explore the ruins after dark. Some explorers report seeing ghostly officers reviewing maps on long-gone tables. The figures are dressed in period uniforms, details of their attire softened by distance and shadow. They stand over tables as if planning maneuvers, their gestures deliberate and methodical. Observers often describe a feeling of watching a scene frozen in time, yet fluid enough to feel real. When approached, the figures fade or dissolve into the shadows, leaving the impression that the activity continues unseen, repeating for eternity. The architecture of Fort George Wright contributes to the eerie atmosphere. High ceilings and narrow corridors amplify sound, while open windows and doorways allow the wind to produce natural echoes. Stone walls reflect faint noises, carrying footsteps or whispered voices farther than expected. Shadows stretch across floors and walls, shifting as light from lanterns flickers or moonlight falls at different angles. The layout of the fort, designed for both defense and observation, creates vantage points where movement, sound, and perception interact to produce experiences that are both immersive and disorienting. Visitors often describe a progression in their experience. Initially, attention is drawn to the fort's physical structure, the walls, stairways, and ruins of interior rooms. Then the flickering lights appear, moving as if guided by an unseen hand. Finally, the ghostly officers emerge, absorbed in their work on tables and maps that no longer exist. Each element builds upon the others, creating a layered experience where the past seems present, tangible yet unreachable. The interaction of light, shadow, and environment draws observers into a heightened awareness of space and history. Local lore enriches the fort's mysterious reputation. Stories tell of officers who remained devoted to duty even after the fort was abandoned, their presence imprinted on the site. Some say that the flickering lights are manifestations of strategic planning, the energy of careful calculation echoing through time. Others suggest that the ghostly officers are guardians, lingering to ensure the fort's memory remains intact. These legends, passed down among residents and visitors, amplify the sense of anticipation and unease, shaping how people perceive and interact with the ruins after dark. Historical records provide context for the phenomena. Fort George Wright was active during a period of military expansion, hosting officers, soldiers, and strategic planning operations. Maps, orders, and careful coordination defined the routines of the fort. While structures have decayed, the spatial memory of activity remains embedded in the layout, producing conditions that can reinforce the perception of presence. Sound carries unusually well, shadows fall in complex patterns, and the human mind, attuned to history and expectation, can interpret these cues as interaction with past occupants. Environmental factors also play a role. Nighttime fog, wind through open windows, and uneven moonlight can create illusions of movement and light. These conditions, combined with the imagination and expectation of visitors, create a compelling environment in which historical reenactments are experienced as living events. By early morning, the fort quiets. The flickering lights vanish, shadows retreat with the rising sun, and the ghostly figures fade into memory. The rooms, tables, and corridors return to their silent, empty state. Yet the impressions linger, vivid in the minds of those who witnessed them. Visitors recall the officers reviewing maps, the wandering lanterns, and the overwhelming sense of history that feels alive in every corner. Fort George Wright remains a place where time folds back on itself, where the past can be glimpsed and felt, and where the echoes of duty, vigilance, and planning endure long after the fort was abandoned. Fort George Wright endures as a monument to history and presence. Its ruins, hilltop position, and preserved spatial layout allow visitors to experience the fort not just as a collection of stone and wood, but as a living connection to its past. Lanterns drift, officers appear, and shadows shift, creating a compelling interplay between environment, perception, and memory. The fort remains a site where the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary, and where history continues to engage all who enter, demanding attention, reflection, and respect. Fort Daniel lies hidden beneath a thick canopy of trees, their roots and branches slowly reclaiming the old fort's walls and earthworks. Moss-covered stone and crumbling timber peek through the undergrowth, revealing glimpses of what was once a bustling military post. The forest has grown dense, twisting around the remains of watchtowers and parade grounds, turning open areas into shadowed corridors of vegetation. Visitors who approach the fort immediately feel a change in the air, a subtle weight as though the past lingers in the soil, waiting to be noticed. The forest has grown over much of the fort. Paths that were once clear are now overrun with roots and fallen leaves. Walls are obscured by vines, and the remnants of wooden structures are hidden beneath layers of vegetation. Even the sounds of the forest seem different here, hushed and heavy, carrying the echoes of footsteps long past. The fort's footprint is still recognizable, yet the encroaching forest makes it easy to lose a sense of direction. Visitors often describe a feeling of walking through a living memory, where history has merged seamlessly with the present landscape. People hear heavy boots crunching leaves behind them. Those who explore Fort Daniel report the sound of footsteps following them along the forest floor. The crunch of leaves and twigs echoes with a deliberate weight, as if someone is walking directly behind. The noise comes and goes without visible source, intensifying when one quickens their own pace and fading when they pause. Observers often turn to confront the sound, only to find empty space, yet the sensation persists. Some describe it as a rhythmic pattern, reminiscent of soldiers marching, a subtle reminder of the fort's original purpose and the men who once patrolled its grounds. Figures disappear among the trees before they can be seen clearly. Shadowy forms sometimes appear in the periphery of vision, moving among the dense trunks and undergrowth. They are humanoid in shape, tall and erect, yet when focused upon, they vanish or blend into the forest. The effect is disorienting, making it difficult to distinguish between shadow, branch, and presence. The feeling of being observed is intensified, a sense that the forest itself harbors watchers who maintain a silent vigil over the grounds. The environment amplifies the haunting presence. Tall trees stretch skyward, filtering light into narrow beams that scatter across fallen leaves and broken timbers. The forest muffles distant sounds while amplifying subtle noises, creating an atmosphere where every rustle, snap, or whisper seems significant. Wind through the trees produces groaning tones that resemble voices, and the sway of branches creates shadows that shift unnaturally. Visitors report that their senses feel heightened, with a sense of time and space altered by the weight of the forest and the history embedded in the fort. Explorers describe physical sensations that accompany the sounds and sights. A chill runs down the spine when footsteps are heard. And the air sometimes feels heavier near certain clearings or remnants of walls. A faint pressure on the shoulders or arms is often reported. Fleeting yet unmistakable, coinciding with the movement of figures in shadow. These subtle touches, combined with auditory and visual cues, create an immersive experience that engages the body as much as the mind. The forest and fort together form a setting where memory and presence converge. Patterns appear in the phenomena. Figures are often seen along former pathways and near the remains of watchtowers. Footsteps echo along routes that were once central to fort life, and shadows appear where soldiers may have stood or patrolled. The timing of these occurrences often coincides with dusk or early evening, when light is low and the forest's natural sounds are minimal. Visitors report repeated patterns of movement and presence, suggesting an intentionality behind what is observed, as if the forest preserves the routines of the past within its dense growth. The history of Fort Daniel adds depth to its haunting. Built as a military post, the fort was a site of vigilance, strategy, and daily discipline. Soldiers patrolled its grounds, maintained watch over the surrounding area, and carried out routines that structured life within the post. Many who served here are long gone, yet the impressions of their duties, movements, and presence remain imprinted on the landscape. The sounds, figures, and sensations experienced today are interpreted as echoes of these past routines, offering visitors a direct connection to the lives once lived within the fort. Even brief visits leave lasting impressions. The combination of shadowed forms, footsteps in leaves, and subtle environmental cues creates a haunting experience. The fort's ruins amplify the past, and every step through the overgrown paths is weighted with history. Observers often recall the sensation of being followed, watched, and quietly guided through the forest, an immersive encounter that lingers long after leaving the site. It is a place where forest and fort merge into a living memory. Shadows glide among the trees, heavy footsteps echo across leaf-strewn paths. And figures vanish before they can be fully seen. The air carries the imprint of human activity, presence, and vigilance. Visitors experience a landscape where time folds upon itself. Where past and present converge. And where the echoes of soldiers continue to patrol in silence. Those who enter Fort Daniel leave with a lasting sense of connection. The rustle of leaves under invisible boots, the fleeting shadows among trees, and the weight of the forest reclaiming the fort remain vivid in memory. Fort Wayne stands quietly along the river, its old battery weathered by decades of wind, rain, and tidal rise. The brick walls rise solidly from the marshy ground, darkened by age and moss, their edges softened by time yet still formidable. The river laps against the foundations, carrying the faint scent of salt and earth. From a distance, the fort appears still, abandoned, a relic of a bygone era. Yet for those who approach, it is clear that history lingers in ways that are both audible and visible. Visitors often report hearing the roar of cannons, the sound deep and reverberating, even though no weapon has fired in decades. The roar is sudden, startling, and seems to come from multiple directions at once, as though the cannons are firing in sequence along the walls. There is no visible source, only the sound, heavy and commanding, reminding all who hear it of the fort's original purpose, to defend and dominate the river. Along the top of the walls, shadowy figures are often observed marching in formation. They appear in silhouette, blurred at the edges, their movements precise and deliberate. Some stand in rigid ranks while others patrol the ramparts, their cadence measured, echoing the drills that once maintained readiness. When approached, these figures fade into the shadows or vanish entirely, leaving the wall empty but for the sensation that they remain, watching and observing. The interior of the battery holds its own mysteries. Hallways and gun emplacements are quiet. The air thick with the scent of old bricks and river mist. Footsteps can be heard in these spaces even when no one is present. Soft at first, then increasing in rhythm, as if a group of soldiers is passing through, moving from one station to another. Doors groan as if opened by unseen hands. And floors creak beneath imagined weight. These subtle sounds contribute to an atmosphere of activity frozen in time. A fort that continues its work in echoes and shadows. Visitors describe a heightened awareness when walking along the walls. The river below reflects the waning light, casting long, shifting shadows that merge with the figures above. Mist rising from the water drifts across the ramparts, obscuring and revealing movement in unpredictable ways. The effect is disorienting. It is difficult to distinguish solid forms from illusion, and every sound, every shift in shadow, feels intentional. The fort seems to breathe in rhythm with the river, alive with memory and presence. Historical context explains much of the fort's enduring atmosphere. Soldiers maintained vigilance, drilling along the walls, operating the cannons, and patrolling the perimeter. Operating the cannons. And patrolling the perimeter. Over time, the fort fell into disuse, abandoned as military strategies evolved and newer fortifications were built. Yet the discipline, activity, and tension of its past appear to have left a lasting imprint, replaying subtly in the space for those who enter. One visitor recounted standing on the ramparts at dusk, hearing the deep roar of cannon fire echo across the river. Shadowy figures appeared along the walls, marching with precision, their steps in time with the imagined volleys. When the observer stepped closer, the figures vanished, leaving only the sound of water and the distant echo of their formation. The effect was profound, a living connection to the fort's operational past. Another explorer described walking through the batteria's interior corridors. When soft footsteps began behind him, he paused, and the rhythm of marching continued, moving toward the main gun emplacements. Shadows seemed to shift along the walls, suggesting figures passing silently. Their presence undeniable yet physically absent. The combination of sound, shadow, and architecture created a sense of being part of a larger historical tableau, where the soldier's drills and vigilance persisted beyond life. The top of the walls offers perhaps the most immersive experience. Sweeping views of the river, a sense of control over the surrounding environment. And the faint presence of those who once maintained it. Shadowy figures appear at intervals, marching in silence. Pausing to look over the river, then moving again in perfect coordination. Mist and the reflection of the river enhanced the scene, blending reality and memory into a single experience that is both haunting and compelling. Fort Wayne remains a place where the past endures visibly and audibly. The roar of cannons, the figures marching in formation, and the subtle movement of shadows all contribute to a sense of preserved history. Visitors leave with vivid impressions of activity that no longer exists yet continues in a spectral rhythm. The fort endures not only as a historical structure but as a living memory of vigilance, discipline, and presence. Offering an immersive connection to the soldiers, drills, and defensive purpose that shaped its existence. Those who explore Fort Wayne walk through both space and time, witnessing the echo of past routines and the silhouettes of soldiers who remain. The river continues to flow below, reflecting light and shadow, while the walls hold the memory of strength, vigilance, and movement. Fort Wayne is a place where history is palpable, where sound, shadow, and the spirit of the past converge, to create an unforgettable experience for all who venture into its quiet yet active ruins. Those who explore Fort Wayne walk through both space and time, witnessing the echo of past routines and the silhouettes of soldiers who remain. The river continues to flow below, reflecting light and shadow, while the walls hold the memory of strength, vigilance, and movement. Fort Wayne is a place where history is palpable, where sound, shadow, and the spirit of the past converge, to create an unforgettable experience for all who venture into its quiet yet active ruins. Fort King rises above the rivers and plains, its stone walls commanding a sweeping view of the surrounding landscape. From this vantage point, soldiers once watched for approaching forces, their eyes scanning the horizon for movement. The fort's ramparts stretch along the edges of the bluff, and its bastions and towers are still visible, weathered by time but retaining a sense of deliberate design. During the day, the fort exudes quiet strength, with the river glinting in sunlight and the fields below stretching endlessly. Yet as night falls, a different presence emerges. One that connects visitors with the fort's long history. Figures appear along the ramparts at dusk, clad in old guard uniforms. They move slowly, pacing with measured steps, as though retracing routines from centuries past. Observers describe the figures as transparent and ghostly, yet their movements are deliberate and precise. They march along the walls, inspecting the fort, turning at corners, and disappearing momentarily behind towers before reappearing in another section. The sight is fleeting, often vanishing when approached, leaving only the impression of activity that refuses to be fully captured. Alongside the figures, visitors report subtle physical sensations. Cold fingers sometimes brush against their arms when standing near windows or along the ramparts, fleeting but unmistakable. The touch carries no pain, only a sudden awareness of presence, a chill that seems to pass from one moment to the next. Some describe it as an echo of the soldiers themselves, an imprint of vigilance that has lingered through time and become part of the fort's atmosphere. The architecture of Fort King enhances these experiences. Footsteps in one section echo through hallways, blending with natural noises and making it difficult to determine the source. Shadows stretch and shift along walls and floors, sometimes forming shapes that resemble figures or objects out of place. Lanterns or shafts of moonlight passing through windows highlight these movements, revealing fleeting glimpses of form before darkness returns. Auditory phenomena accompany the visual. Distant footsteps echo along the ramparts, soft and uneven, sometimes accelerating or fading without explanation. Murmurs drift through rooms and hallways, unintelligible but distinctly human in quality. Voices rise into commands or calls, faintly carrying the timbre of military order. These sounds are irregular, appearing at random intervals, creating the impression that the fort's occupants continue their duties unseen. Visitors often report an uneasy sense of being observed, as if the figures and sounds are aware of their presence, monitoring their movements through the fort's chambers. Fort King's history provides context for these experiences. The fort was built as a strategic defensive position, manned by soldiers responsible for overseeing the surrounding territory and river traffic. Daily routines involved patrols, drills, and continuous observation, often under harsh conditions and in isolation. Accounts from the era describe strict discipline, the constant clinking of equipment, and the presence of guards stationed along the walls for hours on end. Over time, the fort was abandoned, yet echoes of these practices seem to linger, manifesting as movements, sounds, and sensations experienced by those who enter today. Visitors often note the fort's layout as contributing to the spectral effects. Elevated positions along the ramparts offer wide views, yet corners, corridors, and chambers obscure lines of sight, creating areas where shadows collect. The play of light and darkness within the fort amplifies perception, making figures appear and disappear, and sounds seem to originate from unexpected locations. The combination of architecture, history, and environmental conditions produces a heightened awareness, where every movement or shift in light carries potential significance. The river and plains below add another layer to the experience. Reflections from the water catch the moonlight and illuminate the fort intermittently, highlighting walls, windows, and towers. Mist rising from the river can obscure vision, bending light and creating the illusion of figures moving across open areas. The plain stretches amplify sound, allowing faint noises to carry farther than they are. making footsteps or whispers seem closer than they are. The interplay of landscape and structure ensures that the fort remains an immersive environment after dark. Those who spend extended periods at Fort King often describe a feeling of temporal overlap. Past and present coexist, with shadows, footsteps, and subtle touches evoking life within the fort as it once was. The pacing figures, the cold brushes along arms, and the shifting shadows create a narrative of routine and vigilance that continues despite centuries of abandonment. Visitors emerge with a vivid impression of soldiers still performing their duties, of a place where history is actively preserved through presence and perception. By dawn, the activity subsides. Shadows retreat with the rising sun, footsteps and murmurs fade, and the fort returns to its daytime quiet. The river glints, the plains stretch in calm clarity. And the stone walls appear solid yet inert. Yet for those who witnessed the phenomena, the sensations remain, lingering in memory as a testament to the enduring presence of Fort King's past occupants. The fort endures not merely as a historical site, but as a space where the vigilance, discipline, and presence of centuries past are palpable, felt by anyone walking its ramparts, corridors, and towers in the quiet hours of dusk and night. Its earthworks and brick walls were constructed to defend against enemy forces, providing a vantage point over the surrounding marshes and waterways. Yet as night falls, visitors report that the fort transforms, the echoes of the past becoming almost tangible, filling the air with sounds and sights that transport observers to a different era. Visitors hear drums beating at midnight. At first, the sound is faint, almost imperceptible, like the distant rhythm of a parade ground long abandoned. The steady cadence grows clearer, reverberating through the walls and echoing across the marsh below. The sound is precise and deliberate, distinct from wind or wildlife, and it seems to carry with it the energy of soldiers on duty. Those present often feel the vibration underfoot and the steady pulse in the air, as though the fort itself is alive with the memory of military discipline and preparation. Some see ghostly soldiers raising flags on the walls. The figures are dressed in period uniforms, their outlines shimmering in the dim moonlight. They move with purpose, hoisting banners and performing drills as though the fort were fully manned. When approached, the soldiers vanish, leaving behind only the faint impression of their actions. The lingering sense that history is playing out in repeated patterns. The combination of sight and sound creates an immersive experience, where the past seems as present as the ground beneath one's feet. The fort's architecture enhances the sensations reported. Thick earthworks and brick walls carry and amplify sound in unusual ways, allowing the beat of drums to travel across the grounds with startling clarity. Shadows cast by the battlements and corner towers stretch and shift under moonlight, creating shapes that suggest movement even in empty spaces. The marshes below reflect the dim light of the moon and lanterns, adding layers of reflection that make the perimeter appear animated. These environmental factors, combined with the historical context, contribute to a profound sense of immersion for those exploring Fort Morris at night. Visitors often describe a sequence in their experiences. Initially, the attention is drawn to the physical layout of the fort, the walls, the cannon positions, and the open parade grounds. Then the rhythmic drumbeats emerge, echoing through the structures and across the marshes, commanding attention and shaping perception. Finally, the ghostly soldiers appear, raising flags and patrolling the walls, their presence adding a visual layer to the auditory experience. Each element builds upon the other, creating a multidimensional impression that engages both the senses and the imagination. Local legend enhances the fort's mysterious reputation. Stories tell of soldiers who never left the fort, bound by duty or loyalty, repeating their tasks in the hours after nightfall. Some accounts claim that the drumbeats signal key moments in past battles, preserved in the fort's structure and memory. Others suggest that the flag-raising figures are reminders of vigilance and readiness, guardians of history enacted nightly for anyone who observes. These tales, passed through generations of locals and guides, provide a framework for interpreting the experiences of visitors and deepen the sense of mystery surrounding the site. Historical context offers partial explanation for some phenomena. Fort Morris was constructed to defend a critical point along the river, and soldiers performed precise drills, patrols, and signaling with drums and flags. The layout of the fort was designed to maximize observation and communication, creating patterns that can influence perception when revisited. Sounds can echo over the marshes, and moonlight can create visual distortions along the walls and battlements. Yet these explanations cannot fully account for the consistency of reports describing ghostly figures, flag raising, and the clarity of drumbeats experienced by multiple observers. Environmental conditions play a role as well. Nighttime fog, wind, and the reflective surfaces of water amplify both sound and light, producing sensations of movement and presence. Shadows stretch unpredictably, while still air carries sound in ways that make it appear localized. The combination of these factors with historical expectation primes the mind to perceive activity, yet the experiences reported are detailed, coordinated, and remarkably consistent, suggesting more than simple misperception. The fort engages the imagination and the senses, creating a dynamic environment that feels both real and spectral. By dawn, Fort Morris returns to quiet. The drumbeats fade, shadows shrink with the rising sun, and the ghostly soldiers disappear. The flagpoles remain empty, and the marsh below reflects the light of morning, rather than spectral lanterns. Yet the impressions linger. Visitors recall the rhythmic pulse of drums, the sight of figures moving with precision, and the overwhelming sense of presence that connects the observer to the past. Fort Morris remains a place where history is palpable, where memory and imagination converge, and where the echoes of vigilance and conflict continue to resonate across time. Fort Morris stands as a testament to strategy, discipline, and endurance. Its walls, earthworks, and vantage points preserve the imprint of history. For those who explore it at night, the past returns in a sensory experience. Drums beat, soldiers appear, and flags rise, creating a vivid connection to a time when the fort was alive with purpose. Visitors leave with a lasting awareness that Fort Morris is more than a historic city. It is a place where history is enacted, remembered, and felt, bridging the present with the enduring spirit of those who once served upon its walls. Fort George stands near the coastline, its weathered walls overlooking the tidal waters where ships once sailed to and from the harbor. The fort's structure, a blend of brick and timber, bears the marks of centuries of wind, salt, and rain. During the day, the ruins are quiet, with gulls calling overhead and the occasional breeze rustling through overgrown grass and moss-covered stone. Yet at night, Fort George transforms into a place where the past seems to return, and the air itself feels charged with memory. Lantern lights appear along the boardwalk at night. Visitors walking near the shoreline report seeing faint glimmers of light moving along the wooden boardwalk that leads to and from the fort. The lanterns glow with a steady, warm hue, illuminating the planks and casting elongated shadows across the surrounding vegetation. They move as if guided by invisible hands, pausing at certain points and then drifting forward again. The lights never appear during the day, and their presence is always subtle, leaving observers with a sense of wonder and unease, as if the boardwalk itself remembers those who once traversed it. Figures in colonial attire sometimes appear and then fade into the mist. Alongside the lanterns, witnesses describe fleeting glimpses of human forms dressed in period clothing. Soldiers in tricorn hats, merchants with waistcoats, and guards with long coats have been reported walking the grounds silently, following paths that are no longer maintained. They move deliberately, sometimes pausing to glance toward the shoreline or the fort, and then vanish as the mist thickens. The fort's coastal environment enhances the haunting atmosphere. The wind off the water carries sounds in unusual ways, amplifying distant footsteps or the faint slap of waves against pilings. Low fog rolls in from the coast, softening shapes and creating illusions of movement in every shadow. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore mixes with the creaking of the wooden boardwalk, producing an ambient soundtrack that blends naturally with the faint glow of the lanterns and the movements of the ghostly figures. Visitors report that the fog and sound heighten their senses, making the appearance of figures more vivid and the atmosphere more immersive. A chill often accompanies the sight of lanterns or figures, brushing along the neck or shoulders even on calm nights. Moist air clings to clothing and skin, creating the impression of presence nearby. Some visitors report feeling a slight pressure, as if unseen hands are passing close but without contact. These sensations, paired with visual and auditory phenomena, create a holistic experience where the environment engages fully, and the past feels tangible. Patterns emerge in the occurrences. Lanterns appear along familiar routes, typically near boardwalk edges or close to the fort's remaining structures. Figures are most often seen in areas where activity historically concentrated, such as watch posts, entryways, or along paths to the shore. Many witnesses note that the lights and figures seem synchronized, as though performing a routine once common to the fort's inhabitants. These patterns suggest intention, offering a glimpse into the lives and habits of those who once lived and worked at Fort George. History contributes to the fort's spectral reputation. Built as a coastal defense and trading post, Fort George was once a hub of military and civilian activity. Soldiers patrolled the walls, guards monitored the harbor, and merchants moved along the boardwalk to deliver goods. The fort was a place of routine and discipline, yet also a place where tensions, duty, and the challenges of frontier life played out daily. It is within this context that the lanterns and figures are interpreted as echoes, remnants of past routines replaying silently for anyone attentive enough to witness them. Even short visits leave a lasting impression. Walking along the boardwalk, observing the glow of lanterns and the fleeting forms of colonial figures. The fog, the sounds of water and wind, and the subtle movement of light creates a sense of stepping into another time. The interplay of history and atmosphere ensures that Fort George is remembered not only as a site of ruins but as a space where memory and presence converge. Fort George remains a place where history walks beside the present, where memory and presence converge. Lanterns drift along old pathways, figures in period attire move with quiet purpose, and the coastal fog softens the boundary between past and present. The fort's structures, both standing and crumbling, hold memory in every corner, creating a landscape alive with echoes of human life long past. Observers leave with the knowledge that the fort is more than an artifact, it is a living record of people, routines, and stories preserved in light, mist, and motion. For those who witness it, Fort George offers a haunting and unforgettable experience. The glow of lanterns, the figures walking silently through mist, the sound of waves and creaking boards all linger in memory. Every step across the boardwalk is a step through history, and every glance toward the fog holds the possibility of encountering the past in motion. Fort George is a space where time folds, where the colonial era reappears in quiet moments, and where the presence of those who lived and worked there is never truly gone. Fort Hawkins Blockhouse stands quietly amid the rolling landscape. A wooden structure preserved through careful maintenance and the passage of time. Its thick timber walls rise straight and sturdy, each beam carrying the weight of decades of history. The blockhouse was once a vital defensive point, a hub of vigilance and protection, overseeing the surrounding area. Today, it sits seemingly dormant, yet visitors often report that the building feels far from empty. Inside, the air is heavy with the scent of aged wood, mixed with the faint aroma of earth and moss from the surrounding grounds. The floors creak underfoot, and the walls seem to hold a subtle vibration, as though echoing the steps of those who once moved through the space. Many visitors describe hearing scratching and knocking within the blockhouse, sounds that are distinct yet have no apparent source. Boards appear solid, rooms remain empty, yet the noises persist, soft at first and then growing louder in a rhythm that feels deliberate. The blockhouse's interior is divided into small chambers, each filled with shadows that shift unnaturally in the low light. Some visitors report seeing these shadows move behind the walls, seemingly independent of any visible presence. They do not emerge fully into the rooms but remain partially hidden, creating an impression of awareness and observation. The movement is subtle, a flicker at the corner of vision, yet it is enough to produce a strong sense of being watched. Explorers often describe the sensation of the blockhouse being alive with memory. The sounds of knocking and scratching seem tied to the layout of the rooms, originating near doors, corners, or beams as though tracing patterns familiar to former inhabitants. Visitors report that when they move through the building, the noises shift in response, following them down hallways or along the floors. It is as if the structure itself retains the imprint of past activity, replaying it in sound and shadow for those who enter. The exterior contributes to the blockhouse's unique atmosphere. Surrounded by open land and scattered trees, the structure appears isolated, yet it remains connected to the history of the fort and surrounding settlement. At night, the building seems to breathe with its environment, shadows from moonlight stretching across the walls and floors, making it difficult to discern natural movement from the supernatural. Visitors recount moments when the noises intensify. Scratching may start at one end of a room, then move to the opposite wall, sometimes accompanied by faint knocks that mimic a pattern, almost as if a message is being sent. Shadows may shift in tandem, elongating and bending along beams, yet never fully revealing themselves. The combination of auditory and visual phenomena produces a strong impression that the blockhouse is occupied by unseen observers, preserving the vigilance of the past in subtle, persistent ways. Historical context illuminates these experiences. Fort Hawkins and its blockhouse were key components of frontier defense. The sound of movement, the creaking of floors, and the presence of shadows were once part of daily life. The persistence of similar sensations today suggests that these spaces retain echoes of former activity, a memory embedded within the timber and architecture. Visitors often interpret this as a form of historical presence, a continuation of the blockhouse's purpose in subtle, sensory form. One visitor described standing in the central room, listening as scratching and knocking moved along the walls. Shadows flickered at the edge of vision, bending around beams and corners. When the observer approached, the sound shifted, moving away from him yet maintaining the pattern of rhythm. The experience was disorienting, yet compelling, offering a glimpse of the blockhouse as both structure and repository of memory. Another explorer reported seeing shadows behind the walls, following her as she walked through the small chambers. The shapes did not emerge into the rooms, remaining partially concealed, yet their movement was unmistakable. Accompanying the shadows, knocking occurred at regular intervals, as though marking footsteps or signaling presence. She described the combination of sounds and subtle visual cues as immersive, creating a connection to the past that was immediate and tangible. Fort Hawkins Blockhouse continues to stand as a space where history and perception converge. The preserved structure retains the memory of vigilance, movement, and activity, expressed through the sounds of scratching and knocking, and the shifting shadows behind walls. Visitors leave with a heightened awareness of space, sound, and atmosphere, carrying the impression that the blockhouse is more than timber and nailsa. It is a living archive, preserving the presence of those who once called it home. The blockhouse offers an experience that is both educational and haunting. Its walls hold echoes of past routines, its shadows suggest observers long gone, and its sounds remind every visitor of the human activity that shaped it. Fort Hawkins Blockhouse endures as a testament to the frontier past, a place where architecture, history, and lingering presence converge, inviting all who enter to witness the subtle persistence of memory and the quiet vigilance that remains embedded within its walls. Fort Montgomery stands atop a river bluff, overlooking the currents below and the surrounding terrain where skirmishes once raged. Its stone walls and earthworks remain, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, with remnants of cannon emplacements and guard positions still visible. By day, the fort appears serene, the river reflecting sunlight across the surface, and the surrounding field stretching in quiet expanse. Yet the history embedded in the fort transforms its atmosphere when dusk approaches, revealing a presence that is as persistent as it is subtle. Visitors often notice the first signs of activity as evening falls. Lanterns, left long abandoned, begin to sway gently, as though caught by a breeze that does not exist. The light flares and dims sporadically, illuminating sections of the stone walls and earthworks for brief moments. Shadows cast by the lantern stretch across the ground and along the fortifications, moving in ways that do not correspond to wind or natural movement. The shadows cast by the lantern stretch across the ground and along the fortifications, moving in ways that do not correspond to wind or natural movement. The effect is unsettling, creating a sense of motion and life where the fort should be empty and silent. Ghostly figures appear along the perimeter at twilight, clad in military attire of the era when the fort was active. They march in formation or stand at intervals along the walls, their posture precise and deliberate. Occasionally, they are seen pointing toward distant points along the river or fields, issuing commands silently. Observers report that the figures disappear when approached, only to reappear elsewhere, maintaining the illusion of ongoing activity across the fort. Yet no voice accompanies the motions. The fort's layout contributes to the intensity of these experiences. Long corridors and stairways create echoes, allowing footsteps and distant clanging to resonate. Open courtyards and parapets frame the river and surrounding land. Shadows and figures can appear and disappear. The interplay of light from swaying lanterns and fading daylight casts fleeting shapes across the walls, enhancing the sense that the fort remains occupied, that it continues to function in ways unseen. Sounds are as significant as sight. Observers report the soft clink of metal, the distant scrape of armor, and footsteps pacing along the stone floors. These noises often coincide with the movement of ghostly soldiers or the sway of lanterns, giving the impression that the fort is alive with purpose. Occasionally, muffled shouts or commands echo through corridors and courtyards, barely audible, yet distinct enough to create a sense of ongoing vigilance. The auditory phenomena blend seamlessly with natural ambient sounds, creating an immersive atmosphere that engages all senses. The fort's history explains, in part, the persistence of these phenomena. Fort Montgomery was the site of repeated skirmishes and defensive actions, its soldiers enduring harsh conditions while monitoring the river and surrounding approaches. Training, drills, and constant vigilance were a part of daily life, and the fort structure reinforced these routines with tight corridors, elevated walls, and commanding views. The echoes of movement, light, and shadow observed today are believed by some to be imprints of this past life, the memory of duty and discipline manifesting within the ruins. Visitors walking the grounds at night often describe a sensation of being observed. Shadows shift in alignment with their movement, lanterns sway as they pass, and the faint sounds of marching footsteps or metal scraping seem to track their progress. The fort itself seems responsive, with figures appearing in locations that correspond to the observer's line of sight or path. This subtle interactivity enhances the immersive experience, making the fort feel both present and aware, a place where history and perception intersect. Visual phenomena are particularly striking. Figures appear briefly along the walls, in windows, or on parapets, often illuminated by the occasional swing of a lantern. The silhouettes are clear enough to convey posture and movement, yet their forms remain ghostly and translucent. Observers report that these figures maintain formation, march in precise intervals, or gesture toward points of interest along the fort's perimeter. Their movements are purposeful, deliberate, and consistent with the fort's historical routines. Despite repeated observation, the experiences remain elusive to full documentation. Cameras capture faint outlines or blurred movements, and audio devices pick up intermittent footsteps or clinking. Yet the vivid sense of presence often escapes recording. Those present experience a combination of sight, sound, and touch that is perceptual, creating lasting impressions of soldiers continuing their duties long after the fort was abandoned. The phenomena emphasize the fort's enduring connection to the past, where duty, vigilance, and memory persist. By dawn, the fort returns to quiet. Lanterns cease their sway, figures fade into the lingering mist, and the soundscape becomes dominated by the river and the wind across the fields. Stone walls and earthworks appear solid and inert, yet visitors leave with the memory of ghostly soldiers, swaying lanterns, and silent commands. Fort Montgomery endures as a site where history is not entirely past, a place where the past remains present through shadows, sounds, and the lingering impressions of those who once walked and guarded the riverbanks. Fort Montgomery continues to stand as both historical monument and living memory. Its commanding location, enduring structures, and subtle manifestations of the past offer a haunting and immersive experience. Visitors witness not just stone and earth, but the echoes of soldiers and the rhythm of duty that persist across centuries, a silent testament to vigilance, presence, and the passage of time along the river bluff. Nestled on rolling terrain, Fort McPherson served as a key military training site for decades. Its parade grounds stretch wide, bordered by barracks, drill halls, and administrative buildings that have endured the passage of time. During the day, the fort appears orderly and silent, a place of history preserved in brick and concrete. Yet as dusk settles over the grounds, the atmosphere shifts, and visitors report experiences that suggest the presence of the fort's past, where the echoes of drills and routines seem to linger just beyond perception. Footsteps echo across the parade grounds. The sound is distinct and deliberate, as though soldiers are marching or moving in formation. Sometimes the rhythm is steady, consistent with a drill, other times it varies, suggesting individual movement across the open space. Those who stand quietly on the grounds at night describe the footsteps as coming from multiple directions, sometimes crossing paths before fading into silence. No visible figures accompany the sounds, yet the weight of each step resonates, creating a sense that the fort is alive with unseen activity. Figures appear in uniform, moving across the parade grounds or along pathways toward the barracks. Observers report seeing soldiers engaged in routine tasks, inspecting formations, or simply walking with a measured gait. The figures are detailed enough to convey the uniform and posture of training soldiers, yet they often vanish before direct observation is possible. Some disappear behind doors of the barracks, others seem to dissolve into the shadows of the drill halls. The impression is of a world layered atop the present, a spectral overlay of the fort as it once operated, active and disciplined. The barracks themselves add to the eerie atmosphere. Long hallways, wooden floors, and high ceilings amplify sound, making faint noises carry far and deep. A creak from a floorboard or the murmur of air through a vent can sound like movement along the corridors. These environmental factors create a dynamic space where perception and imagination intertwine, reinforcing the sense of presence and historical continuity that visitors report. Visitors often describe a progression in their experiences. Initially, the attention is drawn to the fort's structures, the parade grounds, the barracks, and the layout that defines the space. Then the footsteps emerge, echoing across the open areas and drawing focus. Finally, the figures appear, performing routine tasks, moving in uniform, and vanishing as observers approach. Each element builds upon the last, creating a layered experience where history feels active and immediate, where the past and present coexist in the same space. Local lore enhances the mystery of Fort McPherson. Stories passed down among guides and residents tell of soldiers who remained devoted to duty even after the fort's closure, repeating drills and inspections for eternity. Some accounts describe officers inspecting formations or watching over recruits, lingering in spectral form as if the training never truly ended. These stories frame the experiences of visitors, providing context and deepening the sense of connection between the fort's history and its present atmosphere. Historical context supports the fort's unique presence. Fort McPherson served as a site for training soldiers over multiple decades, hosting countless drills, formations, and inspections. The regimented nature of military life and the repeated routines leave a powerful imprint on memory, both collective and environmental. Architectural design reinforces this impression. Wide parade grounds, long barracks, and elevated observation points create vantage points and acoustic effects that can amplify sound and shape perception, making ordinary noises appear purposeful and intentional. Environmental conditions contribute to the perceived phenomena. Nighttime fog or cool air can carry sound in unusual ways, creating the impression of movement in empty spaces. Shadows stretch and shift, reflecting dim light from moon or distant lamps. Wooden walls amplify subtle creaks, while echoes travel long distances. The historical knowledge and expectations of visitors create a heightened sense of perception. As the night progresses, the fort seems to become increasingly active. Footsteps grow more distinct, shadows lengthen, and figures appear more clearly. The repetition of routine gestures and the rhythm of marching or inspection draw the observer's attention, creating a sense of immersion that is both captivating and subtly unsettling. The fort engages every sense, from the weight of echoing steps to the visual impression of movement, creating an experience where history is present and tangible. By morning, Fort McPherson returns to silence. Footsteps fade, figures vanish, and shadows shrink with the light of day. The barracks, parade grounds, and drill halls appear ordinary. Yet the impressions of the night linger. The visitors leave with memories of marching figures, echoes across the grounds, and a sense of connection to the soldiers who once trained and lived within the fort. And where the past remains alive for those who venture into its grounds after dark. Fort McPherson stands as a testament to military history and the enduring presence of routine and discipline. Its parade grounds, barracks, and open spaces preserve the imprint of soldiers' lives, and for those who explore the fort at night. The echoes of footsteps and the appearance of figures in uniform create a bridge between past and present. Visitors leave aware that the fort is more than a historical site, it is a place where memory and presence converge, where the rituals of training continue to resonate, and where history is felt as vividly as it was lived. Fort Greene rises from the landscape with a presence that dominates the surrounding terrain. Its walls stretch high and wide, a testament to military architecture built for defense, yet over time it has become known for something far beyond its physical strength. Visitors to Fort Greene often report an atmosphere that is thick with history, memory, and a sense of lingering presence. The fort is massive, sprawling across acres of land, with gates, barracks, and ramparts that once contained soldiers and strategic operations. Visitors often report an atmosphere that is thick with history, memory, and a sense of lingering presence. Today, it is silent by day, yet at night, the fort reveals a side that is whispered about in legends and reported by those brave enough to explore its grounds. The largest haunted fort of all. Fort Greene is said to surpass all others in both scale and spectral activity. The size of the fort allows for a variety of encounters, with open courtyards, narrow hallways, and tall walls creating spaces that feel enclosed yet expansive. Shadows linger long after sundown, and the fort's features gates, towers, and watch points cast elongated shapes across the property. The magnitude of the fort amplifies sensations, giving visitors the impression that the past is not only preserved but active, moving among the walls and structures in forms that are sometimes visible, sometimes only sensed. Visitors report full apparitions standing at the gates. Witnesses describe seeing figures dressed in period military attire, standing at attention or walking slowly along the ramparts. The apparitions are complete, appearing as they might have in life, with faces, clothing, and posture fully formed. They often linger near entryways and gates, moving only when observed from a distance or fading into mist as one approaches. The presence is described as commanding yet silent, creating a feeling that the fort itself is still under the watchful eyes of those who once protected it. The experience is vivid and unsettling, leaving a lasting impression of history preserved in human form. Lanterns light on their own. Throughout the fort, small lights appear where no lamps have been lit. They glow with a warm, steady light, casting gentle illumination across corridors, stairwells, and empty rooms. The lanterns sometimes move slowly along hallways, pause near doorways, or float along the ramparts without visible support. Observers describe the phenomenon as purposeful, drawing attention to areas of the fort that were historically significant, or highlighting pathways once frequently traveled by soldiers. The lights enhance the atmosphere, creating a tangible connection to the routines and movements of the past. Soft chanting drifts from the walls, repeating commands that ended centuries ago. The sound is faint but unmistakable, echoing through corridors and open courtyards. The chants resemble military orders, repeated drills, or commands once given to soldiers within the fort. They ebb and flow, sometimes rising in clarity and then fading to near silence, blending with the natural sounds of wind, creaking timbers, and distant wildlife. Visitors often report that the chanting aligns with visual phenomena, appearing when apparitions are present or when lanterns move along historically significant paths. The effect is immersive, providing a sense of life persisting beyond the constraints of time. Some explorers feel a presence behind them that follows until they leave the property. A subtle but persistent sensation accompanies many nighttime visits. Observers report a pressure, a feeling of eyes or intention tracking their movements. And a quiet weight that seems to mimic their steps. The presence does not act aggressively, yet it remains constant. Often becoming more noticeable when the visitor pauses or attempts to leave. This sensation contributes to the fort's immersive experience, leaving many with the impression that the grounds are actively inhabited by forces that endure long after the soldiers have passed. The fort's architecture enhances its haunting. Tall walls and narrow passageways amplify sound and shadow, turning ordinary creaks and groans into echoes that feel deliberate. Courtyards and stairwells create spaces where light and fog can bend, producing fleeting shapes and unexpected reflections. The size and complexity of the fort allow phenomena to occur in multiple locations simultaneously, creating a layered experience where visual, auditory, and tactile sensations converge. Visitors often report feeling both enclosed and observed, the fort's design shaping the way presence and history are perceived. Patterns emerge for those who pay attention. Apparitions often appear near gates, watchtowers, or barracks. Lanterns follow familiar routes, pausing at historically significant locations. Chanting aligns with specific areas, seemingly marking spaces of authority, gathering, or movement. These repetitions suggest intention, offering observers the impression that the fort is actively preserving routines, rituals, and responsibilities that once defined its daily life. Fort Greene is a convergence of history and presence. The combination of apparitions, floating lanterns, and echoing chants transforms the fort into a living record. Every wall, corridor, and courtyard carries memory, and every sensory experience feels interconnected with the life that once occupied these grounds. Those who visit leave with lasting impressions. The sight of full apparitions at gates, the glow of lanterns drifting through empty halls. The haunting cadence of forgotten commands. And the persistent sense of presence create an experience that is immersive and unforgettable. Fort Greene remains not just a historical site, but a space where the past asserts itself, where memory is tangible, and where the fort continues to live in every shadow, sound, and subtle motion. Fort Greene endures as a place where history, memory, and the unseen converge. The largest haunted fort offers encounters that are cinematic, atmospheric, and profound. Shadows and light, sound and presence, all combine to create a space where the legacy of soldiers, routines, and vigilance is not only remembered but experienced, leaving visitors with a haunting connection to the past that continues to resonate long after they have left the gates. Thank you, my dear friend, for walking with me tonight through the haunted military forts of Georgia. These forts stand as silent witnesses to centuries of history, of strategy, of bravery, and of tragedy. But in the shadows, in the corridors, and in the towers the past lingers. Some spirits march endlessly, some watch silently, and some wait for someone to hear their stories. If you ever explore an abandoned fort in Georgia, and the wind carries voices through the broken windows, or lanterns flicker on their own, or footsteps echo behind you, remember this. Not every shadow is empty. Not every corner is safe. And not every soldier has left. Until our next haunted journey, my brave friend. Rest well. Stay safe. And may the echoes of the past whisper only gentle stories tonight.